Okay, I'm gonna start a welcoming. It seems like there's not a lot of people in the room yet, so I'm gonna wait a few minutes so that people can start coming into the room, since they're probably coming from that great session, opening welcome session. Okay, welcome everyone to the afternoon session. This is Cartographic Design Tips and Tricks, and I'm Jamie Dennis. I'll be moderating, but the real star of the show today is Morgana Laurie. And I don't know if you don't know who Morgana is, but she's super talented. She is a GIS analyst at the Arizona Department of Emergency and Military Affairs, which also goes by DEMA, as well as a faculty associate instructor in geographic information systems at ASU. Go Devils. She has a master's degree in GIS and a graduate certificate in emergency management, as well as a BA/MA from the University of St. Andrews, Scotland. And prior to graduate school, she was a graphic designer and project manager in the publishing industry with over 10 years of experience in layout and design and several award-winning book covers. So she is going to be awesome, and I'm really looking forward to this. So without further ado, I am going to turn the screen over to Morgana. It's all you.
Thanks, Jamie, very much, and welcome everyone to Cartographic Design Tips and Tricks. I really hope you're all enjoying the conference as much as I am. I'm going to turn off my video here. And in this workshop, I'm going to show you some of my favorite techniques to essentially Photoshop using ArcPro and ArcGIS Online. In the last year or so, we've gotten some really amazing upgrades and the ability to use ArcGIS Online Map Viewer, the new beta, or it's out of beta, and some of the tools in ArcPro that have really allowed us to make some beautiful cartography. So a little about me, like Jamie said, I'm a GIS analyst at DEMA. And prior to graduate school, after my master's degree in GIS and emergency management at ASU, prior to graduate school, I did spend over 10 years in the publishing industry. I was a creative director and production manager for a publishing service company, and I designed hundreds of book covers, page layouts, graphic design for print and digital publications. So cartography, map design, data visualization, those are all some of my very favorite things. And I love great maps, and I'm really looking forward to sharing with all of you some of the techniques that I use. So this is not going to be a broad overview of good cartography because I could talk about that for hours. It's really more demonstrating some of the best tools to bring your map products to a higher level. And what you do with that power is up to you. So I'm going to be using a few data layers here. If you would like to follow along in ArcGIS Pro or ArcGIS Online, you're welcome to do so. I'm using readily available free layers from Living Atlas and AGOL. For some polygons, I'm going to be using population density census tract, and then a Portland, Oregon city boundary, and the Portland bus stop. So if you want to get into this data, go along with me, you're more than welcome. If you are wanting to just go along with whatever data you have available, any points and polygons, you can do the same thing. Or of course, these sessions will be available later if you want to, rewatch it and then go along that way. So we're going to be using ArcPro as if we're a graphic designer in this workshop. And we're going to do this in 3 parts. I'm going to start talking about color, how to desaturate, how to use hue, saturation, and value, and create custom color schemes and styles, and most importantly, how to save those styles for use later on. Then we're going to talk about layers and borders, masking, blending, and shadowing. And finally, symbology, importing graphics and really customizing your symbology. So Photoshop in ArcGIS, Adobe products and Esri products have a lot of similarities in the software architecture. Mostly you can see this with the use of layers. So how those layers interact with each other is a fundamental part of both products. And ArcGIS has added a lot of the same capabilities that you find in Photoshop and Illustrator. Some of these are the color and palette control, blending, shadowing, the use of vignettes, and then if you think of symbols as brushes, you can import all kinds of custom styles. So applying these graphic design strategies can really make your map stand out from default options. It can increase the branding power of your agency or your organization or your company. But the most important thing to me is it can make your data visualization a lot clearer. So we're going to start talking about color theory. Now we've all seen the color wheel. We all know what it is, what it does. But how does that relate to data and why is it important? So if we're looking here at the color wheel, you have your opposite, and those are those white bars. And that's a lot of times what we think of when we're looking at, say, diverging data. And I'm going to be talking a lot about diverging data because I think that's one of the most maybe misused or missymbolized forms of data. And what I want to convey is that you can use any two wedges of color on the color wheel to symbolize diverging data. The important point is that it has a neutral center. So black, white, tan if you really want to go crazy. But when you're symbolizing diverging data against that average or that middle point, make sure your colors have a neutral center. Otherwise, it's related data. Otherwise, it's a rainbow. So your rainbow data is the size of this triangle, right? And I've included here two of the ArcGIS default color schemes, Plasma and Viridis. I think they're really beautiful. But those are essentially rainbow data because it's all those colors that are right next to each other in a row. So that's when you're mapping temperature or something like that. Finally, we have graduated data. This is a lot of times what many of us use most often. And how we customize graduated colors are through saturation, value, and transparency by attribute. So that note about diverging data, it really is the trickiest kind. You see here on the left, these are color brewer diverging data schemes. These are actual divergences because of that center middle point is the neutral. These ones on the right, they're really beautiful, but I see so often diverging data using, or even graduated data using these beautiful but misleading ArcGIS color schemes. So just be really aware of that. And the diverging data, you know, especially like this teal versus brown, these are color brewer schemes. They are available now in ArcPro by default. I'll show you how to turn those on. But we see these all the time. So one of the things I'm going to show you is how to take those colors and just modify them and save them to your own style. So we can tweak them, make them a little bit better. Now, one particular example of this is using HSV. So HSV is not a disease. In this case, I'm talking about hue, saturation, and value. So these are the qualities or the elements that you can change to really easily customize your colors and still make them look nice. So hue is what we traditionally think of as color. It's measured in degrees. So if you think of a color wheel, that hue value is the degree on that 360-degree color wheel. Saturation is no color versus full color. And then value is your lightness. So the value, it's essentially what is the value of the black coming in, that K value. And then the lower the value, the darker the color. So this is how you customize in this color editor window, and I'll show you how to get there, how you customize those default schemes. You can mute bright colors and just make things work a little better for your data. And here's an example of why that's really important. Now, I'm sure we've all seen some really terrible COVID maps over the last year and a half. But this one I'm picking on because it is red versus green. It's a diverging color scheme. I see where they're going. They're trying to take something dangerous, negative, and mapping that with red. Green is safe, green is good. But the result is A, that it's a Christmas map, which we don't like. And B, there's a real problem here with accessibility, right? Because green and red are not colorblind friendly together. So if whoever's making this map just went into their color editor and changed that hue and dragged it a little bit towards the blue, now we have teal versus red. And now this is not only more attractive, it doesn't look festive like Christmas, but it's also much more accessible for people who are colorblind. So in this first example, we're going to create and save color schemes in ArcGIS Pro. First, we're going to desaturate a graduated color scheme. Then we're going to create a custom diverging color scheme and then save those styles for later. And then in ArcGIS Online, I'll show you how and where to customize and save colors also. Oops. So I'm going to move here into Arc Pro. And here I have my census tracts for Oregon. I selected out by attribute, so we're just looking at Oregon. I'm mapping population density, people per square kilometer of these tracts. And in our primary symbology, I've chosen graduated colors. Now, Esri's default graduated colors, I'm sure as you all know, are this absolutely lovely red, yellow, orange color scheme. I think it's their way of telling us we need to change it immediately because there are very few things that this color scheme works for. So because we're mapping in Oregon, I'm going to go with a nice green color to represent all of the trees in green from Portland. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, so this is my hometown. And here we have the default blue-green color scheme. It looks okay, doesn't look too bad, but what if we have some other symbols that are going to be red? What if we don't want as much of a green? What if we want something that's just a little more versatile, a little more toned down? So I'm going to show you how to format this. So in our drop-down window, I'm going to go to Format Color Scheme, and we have a discrete color scheme. We have 5 breaks, which is fairly customary for the natural breaks. And then I'm going to take this first, or this right-hand side, the most green, the most saturated color. I'm going to click on this box, then I'm going to click on color, and I'm going to go to color properties. So here's our color editor window. And this is where all the really fun stuff happens. So I'm going to click on color mode, HSV. Now here we have hue, saturation, and value. So I don't want it quite as green, so I'm going to drag this hue over to about 184 degrees. So now we're getting more into sort of a blue-green. That's looking pretty good, so I'm going to leave the saturation at 100. But I really want to increase the contrast as well, so I'm going to make this value say 30%. So that gives you, I want you to also pay attention to the text number down here. This is the number that we're going to use later when we put this into ArcGIS Pro. And I don't want you to save color to style yet. We're going to just click OK. So there's our first color in the ramp. We're going to do the same thing here. Color properties, HSV. Our first hue was 184, so I'm going to drop it down by 10 degrees to 174. The saturation was at 100% before. I'm going to drop that down to 50. So as the color gets lighter, that's where my saturation gets less as well, because that keeps it nice and toned down. So it's not really neon. And then for the value, let's go 50%. So now you can see these colors, they're definitely relating to each other nicely. This next one, I'm going to go HSV. Our previous hues were 184, 174, so let's try 164. For saturation, let's go from 50% down to 40%. And for value, let's try 70. So again, as those colors are lightening and the value is getting higher, the saturation is getting lower. So that keeps it that nice muted color. And for these last two, I'm going to keep it at 164 for the hue degrees, 40% for saturation, so 90% for value. Actually, that's looking a little bright. Let's try 20%. There we go. And then for this last one, I want it maybe not quite so white. Hue 164, saturation 10%, and value 100. All right, so now we have this really nice sort of bluish green color scheme. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save to a style. I'm going to call this Oregon Green. Category. If you have any categories, I'm going to tag this ArcGIS 2021 and click OK. All right, so now we've applied this color scheme, and now whenever you go into your color schemes here, we have Oregon Green appearing. So you can go back and use this over and over again. All right, so now say we want to use one of Color Brewer's schemes. I'm going to symbolize average household size. That way we're breaking around an average. I'm going to increase my breaks to 9. And then I'm going to show all. So this is down here in this color scheme drop down. This is how you see all of the Color Brewer schemes. There are a whole bunch of them. So we're going to scroll all the way down. So we're seeing these. And I'm going to take this orange versus purple. Now the purple I like, but that orange is a little much. So just doesn't seem to fit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remember that neutral middle, and I'm going to format this color scheme and do the same thing here. So instead of orange, I'm going to do HSV, grid value, say 40%. So that's like a really nice, dark, creepy blood red. I'm doing red versus purple because it's almost Halloween. So again, HSV, hue 0, saturation, let's go down to 75, value 61. You can see our ramp starting to build here. So one thing to remember when you are desaturating reds is that, of course, it starts to go very pink. So I don't really want pink. That's why I'm going to pull this over just a little bit towards orange on that hue. Let's go 50% saturation, 75% value. And so now, again, we're getting a nice muted color that's not really pink. Let's see, value 5. see, 20. And again, as you are getting lighter, your saturation is also getting less and less and less to keep it muted. And that's a little bit of a personal preference. Sometimes you want bright colors, but so now we have this nice diverging color scheme that I'm going to name Dark Divergent in ArcGIS 2021. All right, so there's our orange green tracks. Now, if we want to do this, want to customize our colors in ArcGIS Online, it's very similar. You want to make sure that you are not in Map Viewer Classic. So if you are, open in New Map Viewer. That's the one with all these, with the dark left-hand side menu. I have my Oregon Census tracks here. So how you change these colors and save them, most importantly, is go to Styles, Style Options. And then here, click on your color ramp, go to Custom Color. And this here is where you put in that hex code from your ArcGIS Pro. Just make notes of it, of your color scheme. And then here on Saved, once you're at the color that you want to be, say you're there, and then add that. And that will continue to show up on your ArcGIS Online account. And unfortunately, there's not really a way to save those color ramps so that it's gonna fill in here on your symbol style. But at the very least, you can save your colors and then use them that way. All right. So now that we have our really nice color schemes, we're going to work on blending. Now, these are not the layers that you're used to thinking of. So once you're mapping, try to think of your layers as graphics instead, because this is the point at which you are visualizing your data. And it's where an artistic perspective can really help to convey what you're trying to say with your map. So you're conveying a meaning, you're telling a story with your data, but most importantly, your data layers, they're relating to the information around them to form that whole picture. So how your layers interact with each other graphically, that's how you can really tell that story and get all the information across that you want to without it being too much information. So two of my very, very favorite features in Arc Pro are the layer blend and the feature blend. So how you get here is in your appearance tab. The layer blend uses a visual effect to blend with the layers below it in the drawing order. So you have your selected layer, and then whichever method you choose for the layer blend, that's how it's interacting with everything below it. Now the feature blend, in contrast, that's when you take features in that selected layer, and if they're overlapping each other, they will interact with other features in the same layer. So I'm going to show you a couple examples about that. So for layer blending, here's our normal transparency on the left side. Many of us, when we're mapping polygons, this is what we do. We add a little bit of transparency so you can see part of the base map, but not too much so that they aren't completely, colors aren't completely lost. For a lot of cases, this is totally fine. But because we can do these other things, this is what I use most often. So in the middle here, we have the multiply blend. Now, what this does is it allows you to maintain the really vivid colors of your polygons while still being able to see every detail of the base map. So I think this is just fantastic. What that multiply means is that it's taking the dark areas of the base map or whatever layers are beneath it and multiplying that value with the value of the layer that you're modifying. So that's why you can see all the streets and the hillshade and all of that while still not losing any color. Another nice one is the color burn. So this is if you want your data to recede more into the background. in this case, the color burn applies the color of that layer only to the shadows or the dark areas of the layer beneath it. Now for feature blending, this one on the left, that's our classic buffer output. You know, it's 60% transparent. It's that medium blue color. We've all seen this buffer output of these. This is bus stops in Portland. But as you can see, they're so dense that this really doesn't do any good in terms of data visualization. You can't see much at all. So what a couple of my favorite techniques for feature blending are the overlay. This is in the middle. This shows how there are those areas of density, but it's sort of subtle. It's just a little more saturated in the areas where those features are overlapping each other the most. And then the screen feature blend is for really dramatic density. And you can see here how those features are really interacting. It creates almost a heat map type of look. So depending on what you're doing with your data, either one of these are a really good option. The other thing I did with these two layers is I also am layer blending them so you can see the streets on the base map beneath. Finally, there are a couple finishing touches you can use to make your data really pop. These are shading, shadowing, and the 1-minute vignette. So on the lower left here, we have Arizona, and I've applied a vignette over the top of it, and that it acts as kind of a spotlight onto the center of the map, fades out the rest, and really kind of gives it a nice, almost spherical sort of look. On the top right, I've applied a 3D effect to a city boundary. And then on the lower right, the same sort of thing, but with a glow instead. Now, of course, I'll say with anything 3D, it should be used really sparingly and conservatively. You don't want massive 3D things popping out of your map everywhere, but it can be a really, really nice touch just to add a subtle effect to your data. So in ArcGIS Pro, we're going to do layer blending on that census tract population density. Then we're going to do feature blending on the bus stop, a subtle shadow of that city boundary line, and then the 1-minute vignette. And then in ArcGIS Online, unfortunately, you can't do all of these things quite yet, but you can do layer blending. So I'll show you how to do that as well. All right, so I'm going to move over to ArcGIS Pro. All right, so here's our nice Oregon green census tract. Oops. Okay. So I'm going to make that transparency. I'm here in the feature layer, appearance, transparency. I'm going to make that down to 0 because we're not going to need it with some multiply. And then for layer blend, you can see there are a lot of different modes here. A lot of these are not really appropriate to use. They do really weird things. But the one, if I had to use only one for the rest of my life, it would be multiply. And here's why. So we multiply that layer, and all of a sudden, you can see all this nice hill shade. You can see the base map. You can see all the reference layers. You can see the street. But none of that color scheme was compromised. It's all still very, very vivid. So that multiply technique is one that I use all the time, and it really is that simple. Appearance, layer blend, and do this. And I really encourage you to try all these different layer blends. Some of them are pretty wild looking, but depending on what you're doing, it could work. So then for our feature blending, here's my TriMet bus system, bus stop. And I've applied the buffer around them. If you don't want to go through that step, you can also just make this symbol really, really big and sort of transparent, a large circle, and you'll still get that same layer blending effect. So here, I'm going to go to feature blend. And first, we're going to try the overlay. So now you can see that that definitely improves things in terms of the showing the density of these bus stops. And if I add a layer blend of multiply, my favorite, well, now you can see streets underneath there as well. And then the screen is up here in the lightning mode. And now here we have a really cool kind of heat map, and you can see very quickly those areas of high density public transportation stops. All right, so next in this map, we're going to take our city boundary, Portland. Right now, I just have it as black with no fill. So what you do is you go to Format Polygon Symbol under Properties, Layers. Instead of Solid Stroke, you just choose from the drop-down menu, Gradient Stroke. So I'm going to zoom in a little here so we can see more what's going on. I'm also going to make the width really, really wide so it's easy to see, especially here in this preview window. So we can see that the interior is where that gradient is going. So I'm going to flip color scheme here. Then I'm going to make this transparent. So when I apply that, you can see it's really cool kind of 3D effect. But now I did something very bad, which was I clipped census tracts. I know you are not supposed to do that, but I did it just for the sake of this demonstration. Please don't tell anyone. So you see here the tracks clipped to that boundary, and you see how that boundary is actually like kind of inside the actual polygon. So how we fix that is with offset. So I'm going to make the offset, let's say 4 points. And that will go ahead and push that gradient outward so that it is not overlapping the inside. Now, if you wanted to make this a glow instead of a shadow, easy to do. Just going to put another layer over it so it's easier to see. Instead of black, you just choose whatever really cool glow you have going on, as if it's highlighted. And then we can make that really, really, really big. And then we're going to have to offset that as well. Maybe not quite that much. But yeah, so that is how you apply glow and shadow to a simple boundary. I'm going to go ahead and make this black again, make this 10 points, and give this offset there. And now finally, we're going to do the 1-minute vignette. All right, so here's our map of Portland and its census tract. To do the vignette, it's as simple as insert a rectangle, cover the entire map, double click that to format the symbol, go to symbol. We don't need an outline. So the layers, instead of a solid fill, you're going to do a gradient fill. For the pattern, instead of buffered, we want circular, and we want continuous. So that gives us the gradient. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that. Well, that's not what we want. So instead, I'm going to flip that and make it size 90. Let's make it 99%. Apply. Now that's looking better, but it's still a little bit too much of a, it's too imposing. You know, we don't want that much of a gradient. So that's where we just go to colors. And I'm going to make that really transparent because it should be very subtle. That's the thing about vignettes. They need to be really nice and subtle. And then you can sort of highlight that. All right. Now to do these layer blending techniques on ArcGIS Online. We're here in our layer. We're on census track. Go to properties, appearance, blending. So here we have normal, what we're used to, but you can see there are all kinds of the same layer blending options. In this case, again, I'm going to multiply. And here we have that really nice base map showing through. You can see the hillshade, we can see the street. You can make it more transparent if you want, but again, with multiply, it's not really necessary. And the other cool thing about AGOL is that you have compositing options. So what this is, think of it as like a logical expression for your layers. It can be A and B, A not B, A or B, that's yours. Neither A nor B, that's your XOR. So if you have a lot of different layers, you can composite them together, which we're not going to do today, but it's another cool option that's actually in AGOL, but not in ArcPro. All right. So now talking about symbols, ArcGIS standard symbology, it's really good for most cases. Of course, they have a lot of different options, but there are so many reasons why you might want to change your symbology to something custom. Maybe it's for a logo for your company or for your agency. You want to convey really specific information. And one of my favorite reasons to do this is to avoid text labels. So the fewer text labels you have on your maps, the better. If you can say it in a word, then say it in an image rather than a word. That's always better to do because it declutters the map. So there are two different ways to do this, and we will go through this as a demonstration. But if you have a PNG, that's a picture marker. So remember P for PNG. And you will choose picture marker from the drop down and insert from file. If you have an SVG, that's a shape marker, and the same thing, S for shape. I highly recommend using an SVG if it is available, because that means scalable vector graphic. And if it's scalable, that means you can make it all kinds of different sizes and you can scale it to the scale of your map, whereas PNGs may have a loss of quality when they're really large. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the TriMet logo and we're going to change that pretty ugly bus stop layer into the TriMet logo. And then I'm also going to show you how to use font as a symbol in ArcGIS Pro. If you want to change your symbology in AGOL, what I recommend is to publish your feature service with symbology from ArcPro, because changing it in AGOL is impossible in most cases. Just make your feature layer in ArcPro and then publish it from there. All right. So here we are with our cool glowy bus stop buffer. And here's our bus stop symbol. So I'm going to double click that symbol to get into my format point symbol. Now first, I can insert a PNG as a picture marker. That's in properties, layers, picture marker from file. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find TriMet logo. That's a PNG. I'm going to apply that. And there it's populating. But like I said before, if you can do an SVG, that's what I recommend. So instead, I'm going to do a shape marker. Insert shape from file. Here's my TriMet logo SVG. Now here you can see in the preview that it's actually zooming in just onto the very center. So to make sure it is true to the actual entire logo, just turn off respect frame. And now you have an SVG that will scale really nicely. So nice and big. And now we have our TriMet logo instead of the default bus stop. Now, say because it's Oregon, and Oregon is full of trees that block the very little sun that they do get. Say I want to change this symbol to trees. I'm going to go to font, and Esri has a whole bunch of really hidden symbols that are already included in these Esri fonts. And they cover all kinds of very technical things. Many of you probably already know this, but I just discovered this recently, so I'm pretty excited about it. I'm going to go to Esri Forestry, and I'm going to find a nice big tall pine tree to block out the sun. I'm going to make it really big, and I'm going to make it green. So now we have trees instead of bus stops, and the great thing about using these Esri fonts is that somewhere in there will be the symbol that you need. So in that case, you don't have to go hunting down over the internet to find exactly what you are looking for, unless it is your organization brand logo, something like that. So that's some cool symbology we can do, and a really great way to customize your map very, very quickly and easily. So in the end, it really is about experimentation. In a way, this is just like science. Art is just like science, in that it requires experimenting. It requires taking hours or sometimes days. If you're making a map product, take that time to really try out different ways to visualize it, because that thoughtfulness will really show through for your end users. If you find just the right layer blending, and if you find just the right symbolism, that's really going to show and make your mapping product stand out from all the rest. So with that, thank you all so much, and I will be happy to take any questions that you all have, questions, comments, and any further demonstrations of things you might have questions about.
Awesome, Morgana, that was fantastic. And we do have some questions. The first one is, and someone else responded to it in the chat, so I'm going to tell you what they responded, so you might want to kind of add to it. But anyways, the question was, do you know of any resources for visualizing what different colorblind types would see when viewing your map? And somebody already, Chris Ferguson, put in there that he uses Color Brewer to pick colorblind friendly color hues, and he also does some color-blindlist.com color blindness simulator. And so do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, those are both really, really great resources. And yeah, that's a really good point to always remember when we're mapping, right? Who's the end user, and what type of accessibility are we looking at? And that's always something to include. In the Color Brewer site, there are icons, whether it's colorblind friendly or not. So if you're going to colorbrewer.com and sort of playing around with those default schemes that are available in ArcPro, that will tell you whether it's colorblind friendly. There are very few that aren't. And that's, of course, deliberate, because we always want to start with something that's accessible rather than try to make it that way later. So yeah, that's I would recommend just going to any of those sites and sort of running your map products through that to make sure.
Okay, I think this is the same question, but they're asking about if Esri or you have any ADA / I guess WCAG has to do with colorblind. Anyway, do you have any kind of color? Maybe they're asking specific color recommendations.
Yeah, so with red-green color blindness being the most common, I would probably point to my example of what not to do. Just never make a Christmas map. That is my #1 recommendation to make sure it is colorblind friendly, because red-green color blindness being the most common.
Okay, great. Next question, any tips for incorporating your organization's color scheme in the colors used on the map?
Yes, so this is where if you have an organizational scheme that's really specific, that's where you can take those hex codes and start putting those in. And then, so in a lot of cases, you can't change those colors, but what you can change is the saturation and lightness of it to try to make it fit a little better. So if you're taking your organization's colors and desaturating them so that they, are receding in that way that you need them to, that's what I would recommend doing with that. And most organizations, if they have those types of specific requirements for colors, they'll give you the exact hex codes to use. And then start from there, and then play with the HSV and not any of the other color settings.
Okay, great. Next question, any tips or tricks for Any tips or tricks for revitalizing some of the legacy maps that we have created pre-Pro, like pre-ArcGIS Pro, in order to utilize some of these techniques? Ooh.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that so many of us run into. We're using maps and map layers and data layers from, way before, and they do kind of end up getting grandfathered into current mapping. So what I would recommend is to not quite start from scratch, but at least start bringing those data layers into ArcPro. Unfortunately, for some, we are all going to probably have to move to ArcPro as ArcMap gets slowly deprecated. So starting that process now, and then when you bring those layers in, that's when you can start the layer blending techniques and all of that, and see if you can't make those older data sets really start to shine using those techniques. But yeah, I would recommend starting the migration now into ArcPro, and then going from there.
Okay, great. All right, is there a way to search the Esri fonts for a symbol? If not, is there a reference guide to help find a font?
Yeah, so the Esri, I'm actually going to share my screen onto that. That's another really great question. Let's go in there and all right, so for inserting a shape from font, and you're choosing a character, so the Esri fonts are all categorized by topic. So, if you are mapping caves, for instance, you would go by topic, kind of like if you were picking them from the regular gallery, your government, points of interest, public safety, those types of topics, start there. And then each one, there's not like a huge choice, so you're not going to have to scroll through forever. But, if we're here's some, looks like stalactites or something. Then you can sort of choose from your category and then go from there. Military, IGL, but I would imagine with Esri's level of documentation that they do probably have those font styles online. It's probably going to take longer to look through that guide than it is to just find your topic here, though, and then scroll through.
Okay, cool. Next question. Okay, any tips for large scale maps with sparse data?
Yeah, that's a really good one, and that's one that I wish we had had time to get to today, but it definitely would have probably spent an hour on that alone, which is making. So Esri does have a base map tile creator where you can customize the colors of the base map, the fonts, the styles, basically everything, and it will save as a tile layer that you can use. So if you have a huge map with not a lot of data on it, you can really increase the context of that map and even change those schemes to your organizational needs or the needs of the data by modifying the base map. And that's probably how I would approach that. And yeah, that's a topic for another day on how to make the custom base map. But there is that. If you just search for ArcGIS custom base map, it'll pull up the tool, and then it gets automatically saved in your favorites.
Cool. And I am learning so much. This has been fantastic. I don't see any more questions in there at the moment, but I did want to tell you in the chat here, Jennifer Pasilis suggested that this would make a great hands-on presentation when we're in person. So people can learn from it, like do a workshop. I know it's a lot of work, but you have a year to think about it and plan for it.
Yeah, in a year there will probably be even better tools in there. So I keep hoping that AGOL will continue to upgrade the capabilities for customization.
Yes. And okay, another question just came in. Morgana, going back to the color theory slide, I need help with understanding the symbology. In the north-south, like from yellow to blue, representing diverging data, then what is the line from orange to the lighter blue and the dashed triangle?
Yeah, so the two bars are basically just showing opposite, that medium blue versus orange, the yellow versus indigo. And then the triangle is to show complementary colors. So your complementary colors are basically the triad. So yellow with that medium blue with that pink, those are complementary and not opposite. So that's why that side of the triangle would represent your color ramp for related complementary data. If that makes sense.
I think that makes great sense. So color, I'm going to sneak in a question on my own here. So color's always been hard for me, and this is really helpful. And this is one of the things that when I was trying to learn about it, is to learn more of it. Is there any books or resources specific that you recommend, like for this, or even to give people good tips on, graphic design? Because so much in making a great map is that visual graphic thing, and it's hard to get. It's hard. Sometimes it's hard for some of us to have that eye for what looks nice, other than looking at what looks bad to know what looks nice. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, yeah. So Stephen King's advice on how to become a good writer is to read. So my advice for how to be a good cartographer is just to look at maps and maps and maps, and then have a notebook where you take notes on like what you like and what works. And color, I think it really is one of the hardest things, like what looks good. So another thing that I like to do is to go to like, colorpicker.com or, any of the color wheel type online things, and just move the colors around, like see what they look like, see why, a desaturated, like more gray looks better than a super neon something. And to really just experiment as much as possible, and to take the time to do that. And then you're going to find those favorite combinations that seem to work, and you're going to see them in other maps, the more maps that you look at, and then start to pick those styles. And then another thing is, if you find layers online, and I'm just going to share this really quick. I know we don't have too much time left, but if you find data layers on AGOL or something, add them into your map, and then if you go to like your color picker here, okay, here's our color. There's this little tool called the Eyedropper. So say you've added a data layer and it's just symbolized beautifully and you love the colors, but you have no idea what they're called because they're all customized. Well, you just take this eyedropper and you can hover over any point on the map and pick out that color. And then go to color properties and grab that hex code. And now you have the color and you have it in your library, and you can even save that color to a style, like my favorite green. Like that.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry, I lost you for a minute there. My internet connection went a little unstable, so I might have Shay jump in a little bit here. Shay, are you on? Help me out.
I am on. Yes. So I'm on. There are no new questions. And there's nothing in the chat other than how amazingly wonderful it is and how much people are learning.
Okay.
And other ways they're using Color Brewer to their advantage. So, and the fact that, yes, pretty much if you had a session a day next week, I mean, next week.
Shay, come on.
So we can. Guys, do you have anything more in chat or Q&A? We have 1 minute. I know the chat closes really soon. Anything else for Morgana before we move on to the Exhibitor Expo?
And maybe Morgana, can you, while we're waiting for things to show up possibly there, can we share your email address in the chat or anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Morgana, you put it in this chat. I'll throw it in the other one.
Yeah, I'll put it in that chat. Yeah,
Morgana, it looks like your boss is
email, so I'm most likely to do it.
Morgana, I just want to thank you. This was an unbelievable, it was a great presentation, and then add to it the variety of questions and that you could answer them all off the cuff. Unbelievable. I knew you were a cartographic genius, but I definitely bow to you now.
Oh, thank you, Shay. It's really fun for me to talk about this stuff again. Like, I didn't even go into fonts and typography. I mean, that's probably a week-long seminar for me, which I don't know. I'm a bit of a typography nerd. So yeah, I'm just really happy to be able to share some of these things with everybody. And I really look forward to seeing the amazing maps that are going to be made by people using these techniques. So.
All right. I think it's closed actually.
Well,
So,
I'll start the streaming will continue until I stop it here. So we just want to remind everybody to fill out the survey and yeah, and enjoy and go visit all of our exhibitors and our booths. And now we have a 30-second delay, so I have to wait for that to go through before we can stop the streaming.
We're just going to stare at you, Morgana, while you nothing. Exactly. I'm going to join back in too.